Welcome to Character in Action with Matthew J. Norcross, the official podcast of the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation. Come journey with us on the real-life stories of character in action. And now here's your host, Matthew J. Norcross.
Welcome to Character in Action from the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation. I'm Matthew J. Norcross, and guess who's back in the studio with me? The one and only Robbie Dillmore. Hey, Robbie.
How fun. I'm so glad to join this episode.
Yes, I am too. Now, this week, we're talking with Matthew Tilley, an attorney who currently works for Womble Bond Dickinson, and it's in Charlotte, North Carolina. Among the many things he's done, he's secured trial verdicts for clients in federal and state courts in matters that involve intellectual property, construction, antitrust, and constitutional law. He joins us now over the phone. Matthew, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Now, you're here because you are a living example of character in action. Now, before we get started, can you please tell our listeners more about yourself?
Well, I am an attorney that does, for the most part, business cases. But very early in my career, a mentor of mine, Richard Venroot, came to me and said, he was representing a number of charter schools in fighting for fair funding, really just making sure that wherever a student and their parents wanted to go, that they were able to get the funding that they would have gotten had they just gone to the district, and to require everyone to follow the law and be fair when they came to that. And so that, frankly, kicked off an entire career, if you will, into areas of constitutional law and education law. I now work with numerous education providers, and I also work with, various parts of government. I've worked for the Mecklenburg County. I work for the General Assembly, or the North Carolina General Assembly, representing them in constitutional cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite a lucrative career, don't you think, Robbie?
Yeah, and obviously I see your connection.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, when you were studying that for the funding, was there something in that those particular laws that you jumped out at you like, wow, I did not see that one coming?
Laws are funny in that they're never written perfectly. You write something that you think is as clear as it can possibly be. And there's a couple places where it can go wrong even then. One, if you depend on people to follow it, laws regulate the actions of men, and sometimes they just don't follow.
Right.
And that's really what that first set of cases were. They weren't really questions about what the law said. It said shall so many times that the court said that had to be direct, imperative, and mandatory was the quote.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have people follow it, and you have to have people abide by it. Then there's just the imprecision of language. And, a lot of times we can argue about what we mean, and we do that every day. Communication is probably the most important skill, I think, in the world, given our current economy. But there's a very orderly process, almost like diagramming sentences. There's a set of rules as to how we laws and we don't know what they mean. And there's enough squishiness there that if you want to push the outcome to your political point, you can. But if you follow those rules, the outcome 9 times out of 10, it's predetermined. Everyone would come to the same solution no matter what, or same answer no matter what their political persuasion, as long as they applied those rules. And those rules are really important.
Very important. So how do you define character?
I define character as what you do when no one's looking. I still am a scoutmaster or Cub Scout master now. I've got boys in Cub Scouts, but I spent a lot of time doing Boy Scouts, working in Boy Scouts, and a lot of that was teaching leadership, and a lot of that was teaching concern for others as you move up in seniority and learn to be what it really means to be responsible for other people. But there's an amount of trust even in that, even in leadership, that requires that you do what's right even when no one's looking, because the more responsibility that you take on, the more room there is to cut corners, and the more room there is to do what's easy or what is better for you and not necessarily what's in the interest of other people. And, you know, that flows through to being an attorney too, because our job is to go out and always act in the best interest of our clients. Now, there are many times that there'd be times to do it easier, and there'd be times to not work as hard, and there'd be times when you might make more money if you did something just a little bit differently. And like a doctor, the client may not, and a patient, the client may not know the difference, but we do. And it's really important in doing that. And when someone gives you that type of trust, that you always act on their interest and you always do what's right, no matter whether or not they're going to figure it out.
Well, in an effort to go with preciseness of language that you mentioned earlier, although I agree with everything you just said, I would just like to be precise in that I think there's two important people that are always looking.
Right.
And so it's the one important person, obviously, is God is always looking. So there's at least one witness to whatever in the world is going on. But often the person that we struggle with the most in our daily walk is we're looking, right?
Right.
And we unfortunately keep that stuff buried away. And you know, that old saying, you're as sick as your secrets, kind of goes into that idea of like man. Once we come to the conclusion there really are at least two people looking, that we'll be a whole lot less likely to, you know, do some of those shenanigans, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's right. I've never understood the people who always thought there'd only be one person looking. I mean, if it's just you, I understand there's an inherent conscience and we want to do what's right. But that to me is just a sign that God's there too. And I really don't understand the folks who don't understand, you know, have a concept that they report to a higher power. We can get into all the details of religion at some other point, but
I'm sure.
You know, that one piece of being accountable to some higher power pretty much sets you in the right framework for everything. You know, I don't know if y'all were fans of West Wing, but there's this beautiful scene where Jed Bartlett has the doors to the cathedral closed, and one-on-one has a conversation with God of, well, wait a minute, you've put all these challenges in my wake, and what have I done but try to serve you? And you hope that, you know, your leaders are having that type of relationship and struggle and see their relationship as one with God. And you know, that perspective means that no man's above at least morality, if not the law.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a story rather of witnessing either in person or in history. Someone that was a true phoenix, someone that was a role model, leading by example and making the world a better place.
You know, this is I don't know, I'm hesitate to bring this one up because it's so complicated, but there is a lot of discussion right now at my alma mater about one of its namesakes. So I went to Washington M. Lee, which is named after George Washington, who gave a founding a grant of canal stock to be able to pay for students to go there, still pays for students to go there. And Robert E. Lee, who after surrendering at Appomattox, went back and spent 4 years being a college president. And there's a lot of question about, well, is that a man we want to be named after? And is that a man we want to revere, given that, you know, he led what was essentially a revolt against the United States? Mm-hmm. And I find redeeming qualities in him and disappointing qualities in him in history, and I think any honest person would. And it's been a really unique exercise to try to figure this out and to dig into history and to do this. But, you know, if you think about it, there was a day He had run from Richmond. He had gotten close to Appomattox Courthouse. His generals did not want him to surrender. And his instructions from the Confederate government were to not surrender, but run guerrilla war. And he put on his best uniform, straightened it up, and went and surrendered, knowing that he full well might be a prisoner and might be hanged, because he knew that that would destroy the country. And, there's a link to that if you really want to get into the history of my alma mater, because George Washington, who could have been king, surrendered his sword and went back to civilian life at the end of his term as a general, when he could have continued to command military power and continued to serve his own interests above those of his country. And you think about men like that turn down what is essentially ultimate worldly power. And you've got to have a sense that there was some character and, frankly, divine intervention in what they were doing. Now, Lee's this whole other issue, because there's so many other complicated and disappointing parts of a man who lived at a time in history when there are lots of disappointing things about the way people treated each other and about racial history and all those other things. But you do have to find some redeeming qualities in some of these decisions that some of these men made that would have put their own lives on the line for others.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing to think about, that there was a man who even his enemies had the most respect for him.
Yes. Keyword, respect, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, where they are today may be a different issue, but at the time, they didn't give him all those positions after the war, but that they had great respect for the man. And that's a pretty good place to be. I would like to be where, people really respected me that were my arch enemy.
Yes.
You hope to have that type of role. And, I spend my days in litigation. So I spend my days trying to think and out strategize another side, right? And to work against another side that has a competing interest. And one of the things that I find really unique here in North Carolina, and I don't think it's unique to us, but I find that we tend to have a culture around it here, is that there's really an attempt to reach out to the other side, to treat them as human. And, if there's somebody needs an extension, if somebody needs more time, if they've got a family emergency, or if something hasn't come together quite right and you're about to get an unfair advantage just because of luck, very often we try to not take advantage of those situations here. We want our cases decided on the merits, and we want the right side to come through and the right decision, and we'll work with the other side to make that happen. And it allows us to be able to compromise things a lot of times sooner and to the benefit of our clients without having to fight to the hilt.
Yeah. So share. Now I'd like for you to share a moment that stands out in your mind, something big or even the slightest gesture that was a transformative Phoenix moment, one where you knew you had a significant impact on someone's life or on a group of people.
That's an interesting thought. I find it hard to feel that I've made that difference, but I know that there have been times. I think back really to Scouts, and I think back to some of the kids that were coming. I spent a lot of time as a boy in charge of a troop, and I think about some of the kids that got Eagle Scout behind me and made it to that, and knowing that it meant a lot to them, knowing that there was a lot that we learned to teach each other, and knowing that there was a connection that we were all making kind of across almost, it's not generational, but it's definitely age group, because what's an 11-year-old have to do with a 17-year-old, except for a program like that. And I think back to those moments and some of those kids that succeeded to that program, and hope I had an influence.
So if I'm following what you're saying, you yourself became Eagle Scout, And at the same time, we're mentoring these younger boys who, came along and said, yeah, if he can do it, maybe I can. Right? Is that right?
Right. Right. And there was a kid, he was a kid at the same time who I remember, the guy's name Jeff Baker, and he was one of the most impressive public speakers I knew. He was the 16-year-old in charge when I was 11. And I remember looking up to him and thinking, that's who I want to be. And so much of what I think about as being a leader is really influenced by his example. And you hope that you're having that type of impression down the line too.
Yeah, there's a beautiful thing in the 119th Psalm where King David says, I rise at midnight to establish praise, actually because of your righteous judgments. But the ideas of that is I'm going to live my life in such a way that people want to follow, right? And can you imagine, and King David had a special harp, by the way, that the wind would change direction right at midnight when it went from being dark to light. We're talking real midnight. And when that went through his harp, he would hear it like an alarm clock. He would get up and begin to play that harp. Well, if the king is up at midnight singing to God, right, then maybe I can get up at 5 or 6. And what he did, when you think about it, King David, he really established the temple before there was a temple, because all those worshipers, all those people worshiping God were in a way following his lead. And so a lot of times, just like you were talking about, we just do what we know is right because we're looking and God's looking. And lo and behold, there have been a whole lot of people looking the whole time that we had an influence on, when really all we were doing was try to see what God wanted us to do, right? And then
right.
you see that. It's exactly that is a beautiful concept of how I think the Phoenix works, man.
That's right. I got to tell you, the whole story of King David, I really love that story.
Yeah,
so
me too.
Now let's move on to the trait of respect, because we had previously talked about that earlier in the show. Now, this is a crucial trait in business and in life. And my question to you about respect is, how do you think we can rekindle this trait and lost art today?
It's an interesting question. Respect matters in groups where hierarchy is not, is a lot of the ways that I think about it. And that's a complicated way to think about it. But when you work with colleagues and your ability to get help, your ability to work together in a team, your ability to get things done is dependent on your reputation, what they think of you, and whether they're going to work with you. Respect is necessary. It's something you have to earn, but it's something you have to give first. And I say all that because a law firm is really that. I mean, a lot of businesses are very hierarchical. There's 4 levels of managers that report up to a division chief, which report to a senior vice president, and then an executive vice president, and then the CEO, right? And so there's a chain of command where respect comes from title. And I don't think that's really the way, at least not the way I like to operate. I like respect to come from quality. And a law firm really is that. I mean, by the time you're all partner, the only thing that gets another partner to come work with you, gets them to collaborate with you, is the fact that they also think that you're worthy of working with them. And they see value in what you do. And that's something that you have to work at every day. And so to me, respect it's something that you have to give before you get. And so if you respect your other partners, if you learn to work with them and to consider their needs and to consider their practices, they'll often consider yours too. And that's the type of relationship I like to have. So Matt, to your question, how do you foster it? I think organizations where you respect people and you expect a lot of people tend to foster respect among people.
Right. And when you think about it, Matt, what you've been talking about as far as scouts,
Yes.
I know for me personally, having been there as well, I just got a whole different, I can't imagine what my life would be had I not been through that process, both of receiving responsibility and trying to get respect when nobody respected me at all, right? All those things that if you ever became a patrol leader or whatever, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, I was going to say there's always a time when you have to wake up. It's freezing outside, or about 32 degrees. It's 7 a.m. and the only way to get breakfast or to get warm is to collect wood and start a fire, and you've got to get everyone else to do it with you. And if you don't have respect at that moment, it's going to be a long morning.
And a cold one.
Yes.
So on to responsibility, by the way. You had several large responsibilities working as a lawyer, especially because of the cases you've worked on. How do you manage your responsibilities as a lawyer?
I had a oral argument, and I will not say which case it was in, but it was before the state Supreme Court. I was getting ready, and it affected a statewide matter. And a partner of mine who's handled numerous cases, including death penalty cases, came by and he said, "How you feeling?" And I said, "I don't feel up to this task. I've got, there's a lot that going into this, and I'm surprised that it's all falling on me or that I could affect it." And he said, "You don't need to be perfect. You need to make your arguments better than those of the other side." And his point was flippant to make me feel better in the moment, but it's also pretty profound in that focus on your craft and do it, and try not to think about the magnitude of what's turning on it, because the best you can do is the best you can do. And thinking about and getting nervous about the magnitude of those responsibilities really only leads you to a point where you might get nervous and flip and mess up, as opposed to thinking this is really important, I'm going to work really hard. Most anybody who's doing this is going to work really hard and try to get better, and just continue doing that every day.
I heard this spectacular illustration I'd never heard before about lion tamers, and they have a couple tools that you're probably familiar with. They have a whip and they have a chair. I never realized that the chair was 3 times more effective than the whip because of the fact that it has 4 legs. And when they stick that chair in the lion's face, the lion sees 4 things coming at it, and it doesn't know what to do, so it sits down. Right? And the idea being that, like, man, when you got 4 things coming at you, Satan's got you right where he wants you. You're fixing to sit down. But if you just put your mind not on the problem, but on, just like you said, the very thing that's in front of you, that is the thing that matters, and you leave all the other stuff off the table, that really is a very profound answer to that idea of responsibility. Because usually, I almost always feel like I'm punching way out of my weight class.
Well, I know that I am, so.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about the trait of fairness. This is a fantastic trait. And my question to you is, how do you define fairness, and how would you want people to demonstrate this trait in both their professional lives and their personal lives?
Fairness is a matter of respect to me. I don't see those as being sort of, there being a hard line between one and the other. A person you respect, you're going to treat with dignity, and you're going to treat with compassion, and you're also going to hold them to the same expectations of others. And that it flows from respect to me. Yeah,
that's a great way to put it, don't you think, Robbie?
Oh, absolutely. And again, it gets back to that I picture it in Boy Scouts, right?
Yes.
That the better leaders because they respected everybody. And even though that guy might have been a nerd and you did not want him on your dodgeball team, the leader still would show him respect. Then you'd see all the other scouts show the boy respect. And it's a perfect example.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's funny, and we may have listeners who think of Boy Scouts as knots and merit badges, but that program really is designed to teach boys to lead one another. And the knots and the merit badges and the camping and the other stuff is really just the vehicle through which you do it. You could do it through sports. You could do it through, sailing. You could do it through a number of things, but Scouts just did it through camping and outdoor skills. But it's a leadership program, and I don't think, folks who haven't gone through it really realize the extent to which the adults are there to ensure safety, but it's the boys that are leading each other. And it's a unique experience, and as we're all talking about it, it was obviously formative.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you what, we are about out of time, but it was a fantastic conversation, and we would like to have you back on the show again sometime. Matthew Tilley, thank you for joining us. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you today.
Well, thank you all for having me. It was great talking with you.
Oh, wasn't it? This was so fun. I just had a blast.
Yes.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Thank you all.
And thank you for joining me again, Robbie.
Oh, it was fun.
Character in Action is a co-production of the Truth Network and the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation. Your host is me, Matthew J. Norcross. Our producers are Robbie Dillmore and Richard Shannon, and our intro is done by Robbie Dillmore. If you like the show, please listen to and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are posted every Sunday. Thank you for listening, and always remember, everyone can be a phoenix.